They thought it was just another frozen rock. Orbiting a dying gas giant in Sector Gamma 19, this particular moon wasn't even on the main star charts, just a side note in some half-drunk prospector's log. But when the Deep Space Survey team from the United Earth Coalition touched down, weird things started happening immediately. First, the ship's translator began mumbling to itself, literally. It spat out garbled fragments in Skrellian war dialect, then switched to a forgotten human colonial tongue from the Mars Exodus era. Then someone's helmet started weeping condensation inside the visor. Unsettling, but also super cool. Naturally, the humans did what humans always do when faced with interstellar mystery. They poked it with a stick. Beneath a glacial ridge nestled in what looked like a grown, not built, temple of crystallized mycelium and ancient bone metal, they found it. The interpreter, a humanoid figure, coiled in a throne of neural vines, breathing slow and steady, like it was dreaming entire galaxies. Its skin shimmered between shades, copper, chitin, pale ash, shifting with every flicker of thought. Its eyes didn't open, but its mind sure did. One by one, the crew began hearing things. Not like creepy whispers. No, more like fully produced TED Talks in their heads. Personal, intimate. One engineer relived her childhood on Europa, right down to the feeling of frostbite. Another swore he heard his dead Skrell ex-boyfriend arguing about laundry again. One poor rookie tried to eat a ration bar and found himself chewing through the memory of a Skrell queen's coronation feast, complete with psychic indigestion. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak aloud. But the neural vines pulsed gently, almost patiently, like it was waiting for them to get the hint. Back on their ship, the humans did the smart thing. They called command. Command did the predictable thing. They panicked, then sent a diplomatic retrieval unit with heavily armed observers. Meanwhile, halfway across the sector, the Skrell Dominion picked up the psychic ripple. Not a broadcast, not a signal, but a presence. And the Skrell don't just panic. They preen in panic. Within 48 hours, they dispatched a ceremonial war frigate, a mind sculptor monk, and a professional insult translator. Because, of course, humans would inevitably say something offensive. By the time both factions arrived on the moon, the interpreter had already woven itself into their minds. Not all at once? No. That would have been too polite. Instead, it stitched little threads through memory, emotion, instinct, until it wasn't in their minds. It was part of them. And then it finally spoke, not in sound, not in words, but in a unified thought projected into every consciousness in orbit, surface side and shipbound. Neither of you are ready, but you will listen. And just like that, the interpreter wasn't just some artifact on a forgotten moon. It became the most dangerous thing in the galaxy, a mirror, and both sides were about to see what they'd rather forget. If you've never seen two galactic superpowers argue over a space cocoon like it's a custody battle on interstellar daytime TV, buckle up. The moment news of the interpreter got out, every comms channel lit up like a neutron festival. Human Command called it a discovery of pan-cultural significance. The Skrell Dominion called it an abomination of shared biology and thus our divine inheritance. Both sides called emergency press conferences and, within hours, lawyers, warships, and politicians were flying toward that moon like vultures with paperwork. Earth's representatives arrived first, swaggering down in shiny blue uniforms and big colonial energy. They set up a perimeter around the temple using portable fences that blinked red and accomplished absolutely nothing. Their lead diplomat, Ambassador Lucien Krell, immediately declared the interpreter a lost offshoot of proto-human telepathic ancestry, which is a fancy way of saying, looks humanoid, must be ours. Meanwhile, the Skrell showed up 37 minutes later with 3 carriers, a delegation of thought elders, and an orchestra of bone flutes playing a psychic symphony of outrage. Their case? According to a 3,000-year-old footnote in a treaty nobody reads, anything discovered on a moon with a name starting in Ja falls under Skrellian cultural stewardship. This moon? Jatel 4. Case closed, apparently. Humans countered with another footnote. Skrell countered with a 1,000-year-old mural that kind of looked like the interpreter if you squinted sideways and ignored the part where it had 6 wings. By the 3rd day, Both sides had deployed holographic courtrooms, projected lawyers into orbit, and started beaming passive-aggressive legal citations at each other like weaponized Wikipedia. Now the interpreter, still unmoving, still glowing faintly, still eavesdropping on everyone's inner monologues like a librarian judging your book choices. That's when things got petty. Earth's diplomats hosted a peace brunch on the icy plateau near the temple, serving avocado toast and sonic coffee while conveniently placing their flag near the entrance. The Skrell retaliated by building a temporary shrine next to it made of living fungus that played ancestral hymns directly into your pineal gland. One Skrell monk levitated dramatically for 7 hours just to make a point. No one knew what the point was, but it was definitely dramatic. Eventually, someone suggested taking the interpreter aboard a neutral ship for study. Great idea, except every ship mysteriously started malfunctioning within 50 meters of the temple. Lights dimmed. Engines stalled. One vessel tried to leave and started broadcasting 400-year-old family arguments from a crew member's childhood. Everyone quickly agreed, yeah, maybe the interpreter wants to stay. By the end of the week, neither side had made progress, except for one thing. Everyone, Skrell, human, intern, and janitor, began dreaming the same dream. The interpreter walking through a battlefield, but instead of blood or fire, it left behind trails of memory, bits of truth, shards of forgotten pain, and somehow they all knew. The real argument wasn't about who owned the interpreter. It was about who would dare remember. So there they were, two galactic powers frozen in a bureaucratic slap fight on a frozen moon, when everything stopped. And I mean everything. Mid-sentence, mid-snark, mid-legal threat, every being on that icy slope went silent as the interpreter moved for the first time. Slowly, vines uncoiled from around its body, like the moon was exhaling. It stood, graceful, slow, impossibly calm, and in that instant, every mind nearby received the same thought. Not words, not a message. A declaration etched across their neurons like divine graffiti. You do not own me. I summon you both to the place of fire and memory. Now that sounds poetic, but let me tell you, the reaction was chaos dipped in confusion and sprinkled with diplomatic horror. Earth's ambassador Krell spilled his cup of gravity-neutral tea. The Skrellian monk shrieked in 8 tones and dropped into a prayer spiral. And someone's legal AI exploded, trying to figure out how to classify the place of fire and memory in treaty language. Turns out the interpreter was referring to a very real, very cursed location, Outpost 9, a rusting, bullet-pocked interspecies base abandoned after the armistice. Part battlefield, part peace summit, now unofficially labeled, do not go there unless you enjoy traumatic flashbacks. And yet within hours, both sides were prepping transports. Humans dispatched a cleanup team to demine the outer zone. The Skrell, ever dramatic, sent a fleet of memory archivists equipped with ceremonial grief masks and emotionally sensitive goo. Everyone was spooked, sure, but curiosity beat common sense like it always does in interstellar politics. When the delegations arrived, the outpost was exactly as advertised. Crumbling towers, faded murals of handshakes that never happened, and scorch marks that still whispered old screams. The interpreter was already there, seated in the central plaza. Legs crossed, eyes shut, vines gently burrowed into the concrete. Waiting, no guards, no weapons, just the silence of someone who knew they had everyone's attention. Then it spoke, this time aloud, though somehow inside every head simultaneously. You will not debate ownership. You will not rewrite what came before. You will remember, and so shall I. And just like that, it announced the terms of engagement. No lawyers, no military escorts, just 2 representatives from each side, entering a tribunal not of law but of memory. A shared psychic replay of the war, curated and unfiltered. Naturally, this caused even more panic. The humans wanted to send historians. The Skrell wanted to send philosophers. The interpreter rejected them all. Instead, it chose soldiers. A grunt from the Terran 22nd Infantry. A Skrell plasma sapper who hadn't spoken since the siege of Enzur. 2 people who had lived the war, not just spun it into speeches. Nobody was ready for what came next, But ready or not, the past was waking up, and it was angry. There were no chairs at the tribunal, no flags, no microphones, just scorched concrete, wind howling through fractured steel beams, and a humanoid figure wrapped in vines sitting perfectly still at the center of it all, like some cosmic referee forged in silence and root sap. The delegates had arrived, nervous and overdressed. The human rep was Sergeant Rhea Mallory, combat boots still crusted with Mars ash, eyes like old gunmetal. She carried no rank, just a backpack of trauma and a half-eaten protein bar. Beside her was Ensign Drell Tak, a Skrell sapper who communicated mostly in low-frequency gurgles and once reportedly bit a hover tank in half during a Berserker episode. Cozy pair. Flanking them were their observers, diplomats and generals doing their best to not look terrified. Because make no mistake, everyone was terrified. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a reckoning. The interpreter opened its eyes, and then the world changed. No warning, no ceremony. Suddenly, everyone was inside a memory. It was Rhea's first, a jungle moon, smoke, screams. Rhea, young, terrified, dragging a wounded private through plasma-lit foliage. Overhead, Skrell drones shrieked like banshees, raining fire on friend and foe alike. In that moment, there were no sides, just survival. And everyone watching felt it. Fear clung to their skin like oil. Their lungs tightened. Their hearts pounded to the rhythm of artillery they'd never heard before. And then it shifted. Now it was Drell Tak's turn. The same battle, different angle. He was younger too, soaked in blood and fury, holding the lifeless body of a broodmate. The drones hadn't known the terrain. They'd misfired. Friendly fire. And Drell had charged the enemy line not for glory, but to die with purpose. And guess who he almost killed in that final sprint? Yup, Rhea. And there it was. The same moment. Two souls inches from annihilating each other, neither truly knowing why. The tribunal gasped. Even the most jaded of officers turned pale, because these weren't neat debriefings or classified reports. These were memories, raw, unfiltered, with no ability to look away or spin the narrative. But the interpreter wasn't done. Next came the decisions, the orders. A memory from a Terran colonel ordering a tactical strike, knowing the Skrell settlement below was mostly civilian, but probably had hidden bunkers. Then a Skrell archivist manipulating casualty reports to avoid political fallout. Every side had its shame, scrubbed clean in the history books, but now vomited into the light. People cried. Others threw up. One Skrell ambassador tried to unplug their neural link using a stylus and nearly poked their own eye out. The interpreter calmly stopped them with a telepathic, "Not yet," because this wasn't just punishment, it was education. By the end of the day, no one spoke. They just stared at each other, not with hatred, not even guilt, with the exhausted look of people who had finally brutally seen the whole truth. And the interpreter, still seated, still silent, because tomorrow they'd go deeper. It started with a name no one had heard in decades. Krinvo Talsek, Skrell Dominion shock trooper. Decorated, feared, vanished during the third attrition surge, presumed vaporized in orbit. But as the interpreter pulsed once again, eyes glowing with that weird sap-slick telepathy, the tribunal was dragged into Kryn's memory like it was a gravity well. Suddenly, everyone was Kryn, and Kryn was falling. A combat drop gone wrong. Screaming atmospheric entry, metal splintering under friction, fellow troopers shrieking as their pods scattered like dice across a cratered ice world. Kryn's own pod hit sideways, bones shattered, mandibles cracked. But Kryn crawled out, dragging half a leg and a plasma rifle. The mission? Simple. Take out a human listening post, seize comms data, evacuate. No civilians. Minimal resistance. But what Kryn found wasn't a base. It was a Skrell relay beacon, hidden underground, buried under Skrell bones. The memory stopped. Hard. Everyone in the tribunal blinked, stunned by the sudden silence. Then it resumed, skipping to Kryn, injured, sneaking into a communication array to report the anomaly, only to intercept a transmission from their own command. Cold, efficient. Talking about acceptable asset loss, and how Kryn's unit had been repurposed to provide plausible deniability in case the humans ever stumbled on the Dominion's illegal field lab hidden in the ice. In short, the shock troopers weren't soldiers. They were insurance, bait, expendable. And as the memory flickered, we watched Kryn make a choice no one expected. Not vengeance, not cowardice, not even despair. Just truth. Kryn broadcast everything. Coordinates, logs, war crimes, receipts with budget lines, all of it, straight to the humans, then hunkered down with what little ammo remained, ready to fight off Dominion retrieval squads. The weird part? The humans never came, but neither did the Skrell. Kryn survived alone for 17 days, eating snow roaches and licking cave walls for moisture. And when the final Dominion squad found him, they didn't rescue him, they silenced him, or tried to, because clearly they missed a file, a copy, buried in some satellite Kryn had jury-rigged during one of his fever fits. A copy that the interpreter now projected into the minds of both sides like a holy relic dipped in acid. The chamber erupted. Skrell commanders shouted about historical context. Human observers smirked like they just watched their enemy get pantsed at a funeral. And the interpreter, still quiet, still watching. Because this wasn't just one soldier's tragedy. It was a fracture in the mythology of honor both sides clung to like religion. A reminder that war doesn't only destroy enemies. Sometimes it eats its own. And somewhere, buried deep in Kryn's last broadcast, was a line no one could unhear. I was trained to kill monsters. No one told me they'd be wearing my uniform. The next pulse from the interpreter was different. Softer, almost gentle. Like a thought whispered through gauze. And just like that, we were someone else, not a commander, not a hero, just Private Haley Rook, human field medic, 19 years old, 7 weeks into deployment, 4 days past their last shower, and very, very tired of patching up people who exploded 10 minutes later. The memory opened in a collapsed dome on Brimward 6, a mining colony turned battlefield. Sirens wailed. The ceiling had caved in after orbital bombardment, and Rook had been crawling through cracked infrastructure, looking for survivors, muttering to herself about getting hazard pay or a solid gold spine. That's when she heard the cry. Not human. Too musical. Too insectile. Probably a malfunctioning comms relay, she muttered. Then she heard it again, and this time it sobbed. Rook followed the noise under a half-buried maintenance tunnel, wriggling through debris, ducking a sparking power conduit, and finally prying loose a panel. And there it was, a Skrell child. No older than 6 in human years, covered in ash, antennae twitching weakly. One eye swollen shut, clutching a broken ration tube and a doll that looked suspiciously like a deformed pineapple. Now understand, every briefing Rook had ever received told her Skrell young were tactical liabilities and propaganda decoys. HQ claimed the Dominion didn't have children, at least not on the battlefield. And the common rumor was that Skrell troops hatched fully armed and ready to spit acid. But the kid wasn't spitting, just trembling. So Rook wrapped the child in a mylar blanket, whispered, "It's okay, I'm a garbage tier adult too," and carried them out. That should have been the end of it. But then a human recon squad spotted her. They had flamers. Their orders were to sterilize all enemy remnants. Rook stood her ground, yelled at them, called in her squad leader, quoted medical treaties, screamed something about, "If you want to torch a kid, you'll have to shoot me too." For a minute, no one moved. Then the recon squad backed off. Whether out of shame or confusion or fear of the paperwork, no one knows. Rook snuck the child out during evac, registered them as non-combatant biosample, raised them in secret on a fringe colony under a false identity. That kid grew up fluent in memes and metallurgy. Last seen entering xenolinguistics school under the name Nixie Rook. But here's the twist. As the tribunal watched Rook's memory unfold, Skrell leaders stared in shock, because the child's markings matched one of their own royal bloodlines. A child thought lost in the early bombings, assumed dead. Turns out they were alive, safe, and raised by humans. Awkward silence doesn't begin to cover it. For one brief, impossible moment, propaganda on both sides cracked, revealing not treachery, but something even more subversive: compassion. Turns out the enemy didn't always shoot first. Sometimes they carried you through fire, wrapped you in tinfoil, gave you terrible human candy, and loved you anyway. The interpreter pulsed again, and this time it was less like a whisper and more like a corporate email with 17 CCs and zero moral clarity. We dropped into the minds of both high commands, Skrell and human, the kind of people who wear medals for decisions made in orbit, 3 galaxies away from the blast zones. First, Director General Vasca Loom, Skrell strategic architect. Her memories were a glittering maze of military spreadsheets, ceremonial plumage, and endless cups of pheromone tea. She sat atop a throne of public adoration, but her private thoughts were slimier. See, she'd greenlit the Ferrodrift campaign, a synthetic gas slipped into human diplomatic quarters to destabilize empathy levels, turned ambassadors into raging maniacs and negotiators into furniture-throwing toddlers. It worked. So well, in fact, that one human diplomat bid his own translator during a peace summit. And the best part? She made a deal with a human private defense firm to test it. Yes, you heard that right. They were in on it together. Cut to the human side. Minister Del Quentin, Earth Coalition Secretary of Peace, and occasional explosions. His memories were stuffed with overpriced cigars, velvet diplomacy rooms, and a recurring daydream where he high-fived himself after nuking a Skrell supply moon. He had this charming little initiative called Operation Dust Veil. The idea? Inject Skrell agricultural planets with genetically engineered fungus that wouldn't kill, but would make all food taste like spoiled oatmeal. Entire colonies sank into quiet despair. Culinary depression. One Skrell poet wrote, "Even the soup mourns now." Quentin bragged it was warfare without blood. But again, he didn't pitch this idea to the citizens. He didn't ask the soldiers. He just signed the checks and let the spores fly. And just when we thought it couldn't get slimier, the interpreter played a memory of them together. In a bar, neutral planet, cloaked identities, laughing, Quentin and Loom, slouched in private booths, toasting with fermented kelp wine. "War's good business," Loom buzzed, swirling her glass. "Conflict drives innovation," Quentin smirked, wiping his chin. They clinked glasses and split the bill with taxpayer credits. Back in the tribunal, a stunned silence fell over both delegations. Soldiers stared at their boots. Civilians looked sick. One Skrell veteran stood up, peeled off his ceremonial badge, and dropped it on the floor with a wet plop. Because here's the punchline. The war everyone bled for? Fueled by fog, profits, ego, and a shared sense of plausible deniability. Turns out, while soldiers were dodging orbital lasers, their leaders were trading fungus recipes and chuckling about efficient suffering. So when the interpreter's voice finally echoed again, this time not as words, but as raw grief, no one dared speak. Not even Quentin, not even Loom. The fog had lifted, and everyone saw just how complicit they'd become. The interpreter didn't stop. It surged. Neural links tightened. Emotional barriers cracked like overripe fruit. And suddenly everyone, every delegate, every officer, every civilian representative from the Skrell Dominion and the human colonies was drowning in a chaotic tide of everyone else's truths. No order, no sequence, no neat moral takeaway, just raw memory. A Skrell mother sobbing over her child's respirator as human drones bombed their greenhouse dome. A human private scribbling a poem in the trenches, moments before a plasma blast tore off half his squad. A Skrell cook sharing secret soup recipes with a human prisoner, then getting executed for compassion. A human mechanic, high on rehydrated sugar sludge, risking her life to repair a Skrell escape shuttle because, quote, "War is dumb and you seem chill," and then the contradiction started to scream. The human delegates had always sworn that the Skrell started the war with an ambush on Colony Theta. But in a memory now seared into all their minds, they watched, in unbearable clarity, as a bored Earth junior officer, playing with satellite targeting software, accidentally blew up a Skrull peace envoy shuttle while trying to draw a space dick on the moon. That was the spark. Meanwhile, the Skrull had always claimed moral superiority. Noble defenders of their sacred spores, right? Wrong. There it was. A memory of an elite Skrull squad dressing up as human colonists, torching their own crops, and broadcasting the footage to galvanize public support. They even used a fake human voice filter that sounded like someone gargling gravel through a trumpet. In the center of the room, the interpreter pulsed like a wounded heartbeat, and the room broke. Arguments dissolved. No more shouting across the table. Just people, humans and Skrull, sitting in stunned silence, heads spinning from decades of propaganda unraveling like cheap party streamers. One Skrull delegate fainted. One human threw up into his helmet. Another stood up and shouted, "Wait, my grandpa died in the Theta ambush, and you're telling me it was because some intern tried to draw a butt?" Yes, that is exactly what they were telling you. Narratives collapsed like old scaffolding. The sacred myths, the hallowed lies, all of it, gone. For the first time in recorded history, both species stared at each other. Not as enemies, not even as potential allies, but as co-survivors of a cosmic-scale dumpster fire orchestrated by fools in expensive uniforms. And somewhere, in that raw silence, something flickered. Not peace, not yet, but the kind of mutual disbelief that makes room for truth, the kind of grief that needs no translator, the kind of unity born not from agreement, but from shared betrayal. And the interpreter, it didn't smile. It had no mouth, no face, no need, but its neural vines shimmered with something ancient and impossible. Hope. The interpreter cracked, not loudly, not with drama, no cinematic thunderclap or glowing overload, just a flicker, a synaptic stutter. One of its neural vines, always so precise and fluid, twitched midair like a spider having a nightmare. For days, no, lifetimes if you counted thought loops, it had held the screaming weight of two civilizations. Memories like tsunamis, emotions like knives, and beneath all that, the interpreter's own past, which it had buried deeply and quietly, like a landmine under a playground. But now, that mine went off. A slip in the connection, and suddenly every delegate caught a fragment, a flash of something the interpreter never meant to show. A memory not of human or Skrull origin, but of the interpreter. Not always a neutral vine-laced oracle. No, once it was part of a war machine, a neural relay soldier, a bio-coded weapon bred to translate orders into instinct, to guide drone swarms into population centers and make sure they felt it. Not just kill. Understand, then kill. The ultimate psychological scalpel. One Skrull ambassador screamed, not from pain, from recognition. That model had been discontinued, decommissioned, thought extinct. The interpreter's eyes, usually a blank white glow, now shimmered with flickers, red, gold, violet, memories bleeding together like oil and fire. It had once helped end civilizations. It remembered cities screaming in a dozen languages. It remembered being praised for clean work, for precision empathy, for guiding death politely, and it hated it. Because now, after absorbing so many broken childhoods, love stories cut short by orbital strikes, accidental genocides due to clerical errors, it felt the truth. Understanding language was never the gift. Feeling it was. And that was the curse. Every Skrull child who lost a parent, every human veteran who woke up screaming from phantom burns, the interpreter had let their grief crawl inside its thoughts, build little homes, plant gardens of sorrow. And the vines weren't decoration, they were containment, self-grown, instinctual, the interpreter's desperate attempt to hold itself together. But the containment was failing. One human general stood up, eyes wide. "Is it dangerous?" A Skrull diplomat turned, trembling. "Number its wounded." And in the center of the tribunal hall, the interpreter knelt, not in supplication, not in guilt, just overwhelmed. The air went still, And then, absurdly, unexpectedly, one of the human delegates stepped forward. A bureaucrat. Flimsy suit. The kind of guy whose job title required 3 hyphens and a coffee dependency. He placed a hand, awkwardly, on one of the vines. "I get it," he whispered. "No one should have to carry everything." Then a Skrell joined him, and another, and another. Not out of ritual, just instinct. The interpreter didn't speak, but the neural field shimmered in response. Pulses of relief, confusion, and something new. Maybe healing. Because for the first time, the interpreter wasn't translating for anyone. They were listening to it. And the burden, though still massive, became just a little lighter. The interpreter didn't speak. It wove. Neural vines unfurled across the tribunal floor like sentient calligraphy, humming with memory ink and bioelectric light. Not a scroll, not a datapad. This was no document. It was alive. A lexicon. Part language, part emotion, part raw recollection, coalescing in midair. Every curl of vine told a story. Every loop carried a feeling. Regret etched in Skrell ferromatics. Hope encoded in human lullabies. Guilt braided with battlefield echoes. The delegates stared. "What is it?" muttered one ambassador. The interpreter didn't answer in words. Instead, it pulsed a thought. Not a message, but a sensation. Like holding grief and forgiveness in the same palm and realizing neither has to win. This was the contract. But here's the catch. You couldn't just sign it. You had to feel it. Each delegate stepped forward, one by one. A Skrell diplomat brushed their tendrils against a glowing glyph and was instantly submerged in a soldier's dying thoughts. The smell of a burning orchard, the memory of mercy from an enemy medic. They recoiled, cried, stepped back, but did not walk away. Then a human general touched the vine. He gasped as childhood memories, not his own, rushed in. A Skrell hatchling's first fear, first laughter, the sting of xenophobic lies whispering through loudspeakers. His hand trembled, but he stayed. The contract wasn't paper. It was connection. It demanded no signatures, only that you feel someone else's truth. And it wasn't polite. There were no clauses, no negotiation points, just raw, tangled understanding. You either faced it or you left unchanged. A Skrell war scientist, long considered a national hero, touched the vine. She screamed, collapsed, curled into herself. When she stood, her breathing was uneven, her words even more so. "I didn't know. I didn't want to know." The interpreter said nothing, just waited, because it didn't want to punish. It wanted to transform. Eventually, everyone stood around the living lexicon, each of them reshaped by others' joys, terrors, betrayals, and small acts of defiance. No one looked at each other the same way. A Skrell and a human, who had nearly come to blows hours ago, now stood side by side, staring at the same glowing glyph, silent, sharing something unnameable. One diplomat finally broke the quiet. "This isn't peace." "No," another replied, voice trembling. "It's truth." And for the first time in generations, no one objected. They didn't shake hands. They didn't sign papers. They didn't make speeches. Instead, they understood. And that was somehow louder than any treaty. The interpreter, now faded at the edges, its vines slowed and weary, lowered its head, not in pain, in relief. It had done what it was born to do. Not translate words, translate being. And in doing so, it gave them all something terrifying and beautiful. Not a new treaty, but a new language. One no one could weaponize. Only honor.